Hey guys, hope you're well. Coming to you from my hotel room. So decided to take a lot of time in between ZDT's court case rundown to Danny's rundown. The video is doing so well, I kind of wanted to let the ZDT video saunter as best I could. But we have a whole day to go over, so I want to get that out for you before, of course, the verdict is read. The verdict will be read tomorrow. So everything's finished. Closing statements have been made. And as always, I'll give you a rundown as to what happened, and then I'll go in from quote to quote. I don't think the rundown will be as long because so many of these conversations are cyclical, meaning Moxon over and over and over really tried to pin down the physics as to where Danny's foot was and why this RO is ultimately justified. Of course, Moxon says, in addition, the RO is justified because of one incident, the physical incident on March 9th, as well as the verbal incident on May 9th, 2 months later. Here's the interesting part. Moxon is using a lot of the verbal jabs against Danny. The thing is, though, the specific jabs were actually uttered by, here's a blast from the past, Back to the Future, Denver J. Remember him? I hope he's alive out there somewhere. And Denver J was the gentleman who said, we don't want you here. You don't belong here. Oh, look, he's shaking. He's scared. You're a psychotic motherfucker. All of that, none of that was uttered by Danny. That was all uttered by Jay. So again, the mere fact that Streets won with a lot more aggressive and vitriolic language, Danny really doesn't have that. So because they're grasping at straws, they had to find somebody else who uttered words that were offensive enough to be considered threatening, which I don't even think that crosses this threshold. But they couldn't come from Danny, so at least they came from somebody else. Somebody else in that moment on that scene. And it's ironic because Danny alone, if you analyze Danny's actions alone in the second event, then they shouldn't even be considering that as part of the two major events to have this RO granted. But of course, Moxon is, always has to make that stretch. Witnesses, a lot of people just getting axed left and right. There is no Leah. So it was only Danny Danny wouldn't be the witness. Obviously, he's the person being questioned. Another witness was the wife of Philip Campus. So it's interesting that Leah wasn't put on the stand, but Philip Campus is. So I don't know how one worked and the other didn't. But Philip Campus's girlfriend, Miss Heath, essentially testified that he had been in excruciating pain, that he could barely walk around. They might move earlier because they're not able to access their church. And there was some back and forth saying, well, was Phil still committed to going to church? And the girlfriend said, yes, we went every day. And then she said, well, then in that case, he wasn't impeded from being blocked. So, I mean, this is why this is not going to take a long time, guys, because Moxon had Danny on the stand, and it was so much, of just the semantics of the foot. And him saying Danny's language was dishonest because he said though. He said I didn't hurt him though. And he said because Danny said though, that was a qualifying word indicating that he did have intent to hurt. And it was just kind of Danny, misspeaking for a moment. But that's how little he has. So we will probably, there isn't really much to talk about besides for that, quite frankly. You really see, it's funny, Moxon just essentially tries to say the same stuff over and over. There were egregious verbal moments, and my client is being victimized. There's nothing new, which is kind of interesting, or kind of not that interesting, because I'm not actually divulging any new tactics or any new events. So I'm sure I'll think of some more stuff as we read. And I should note that I missed a chunk of the hearing, of course, to do ZDT, so it's kind of running around between both places. Okay. Talk about the chiropractor services. So, the girlfriend is on the stand. Moxon says, did Philip, Mr. Campos, tell you about the incident with the scooter? And Miss Heath says, he said his back was hurt. We had discussions daily. He was limping around. Had to pay out of pocket. The chiropractor said there was nothing more they could do. He's had a bad stem cell on his feet, and he got 4F deferment from Vietnam because he was diagnosed with disjointed bone structure in his feet, which causes him pain. You're really reaching for the past there. This girlfriend, again, continues to speak. He uses a scooter because he can't walk as far as I can without support. He was very upset with Danny. He had trouble getting out of bed. We just had a mattress on the floor. Well, I guess you can't afford much if you're donating all your money to Scientology. Now it's a big problem for him. Just get a mattress off the floor. He takes care of me. But he wants to do so, but he's in so much pain he cannot. Moxon said, so did Phil mention the other incident beyond the scooter? And he said, yes, he felt powerless in that moment. And this is, again, there's a lot of debate about this because in the second moment, the interaction with Denver J, you could see Phil gleefully scootering around and inserting himself due to his own volition into that line of fire. So why did he approach, Moxon asking Miss Heath, why did Philip approach Danny's location again? Miss Heath says, that's where the crosswalk is, to get to church, and he was tired of being afraid. We've talked about moving back to Kentucky, but we know how important my courses are. Got to get those TRs. And then I go to Solomon's, but there's a little more conversation about what a good guy he is, how committed he is, how traumatized. You know the drill. Then I missed the part with that where Dorothy had her on the stand, so that I missed. So now, wait, no, I got the very end of Dorothy having Heather on the stand, and she kind of asked the two key questions. Like all I needed to watch really was that part. And Dorothy Gibbons-White is now questioning Miss Heath. She said, so you said a moment ago Phil went almost every day before March 9th. But since March 9th until June 4th, you say he went to church with relatively the same frequency. Is that correct? Yes. So there you go. She shoots herself in the foot, meaning the frequency of church attendance was the same before Danny started supposedly harassing him versus after Danny started harassing him. There's been no difference in the frequency of his attendance in church. So therefore, you don't really have much of a leg to stand on. No pun intended with a scooter. Did you ever Dorothy says, do you ever personally witness these events? No. Now, Danny is on the stand. And Dorothy wants to ask him a little bit about history. Now, you know, Danny, you got to do what you got to do in court. It's a bit silly. I know Danny has helped the homeless. He's used this as a big reason, you know. I don't know if that should be one of the big reasons, but he's claimed to be helping. I know he's helped, I don't know, to the degree he's indicated. But aside from that, Danny was very effective on the stand. And a lot of props to Danny. He was poised. I felt like I was watching Obama in his comeback debate against Romney. I was kind of shocked. Danny used some pretty impressive words. Poised, well-spoken, rarely stuttered. You know, lightly trolled Mr. Moxon's logic without being rude about it, controlled his emotions, cool as a cucumber. So Danny this is his moment where he sort of shines and exhibits some charisma, which is kind of interesting. Dorothy says, what made you start doing all this work? And have you met individuals with personal experience in Scientology? He says, yes, I have, and their stories have affected me. And I started this to exposing Scientology. And are there any live streams that have had a big impact on you? And he says, yes, Streets LA. Dorothy says, ever been in trouble with the law outside of protesting? Danny says, no. And any actual charges developed from your protesting that were charges initially? Danny says, no. Dorothy says, what were you told you were arrested for on March 9th? Remember, guys, as an aside, March 9th, the incident with the scooter ended up in Danny's arrest. Danny says, they didn't tell me. On the sheet, finally, it did say attempted robbery. Then there's an exhibition of the voices, right? Moxon was just trying to be sneaky because he said a lot of these so-called vitriolic words of keep on walking, you don't belong here. He was trying to indicate that Danny said them, but he never directly said Danny said them. That's because Denver J said them. But he was smart because he said these words have affected Philip without getting specific. So now Dorothy dismantles that and remarks that these words put in evidence as one of the main reasons that this RO should be granted was not actually uttered by Danny. So they play the video of all of that and Denver J shouting, you know, the whole world is watching you being an idiot. Why are you shaking? This is all Denver J. Dorothy says, can you tell me what voice that was? Danny says, Denver J. You know, the whole world is watching you being an idiot. Whose voice is that? Denver J. Or he said the other guy in this case. And Dorothy says, so Philip came into your live stream. And Danny simply said, keep on walking. And then there's another quote that they play to confirm. Get your TRs in, buddy. You're shaking like a leaf. Whose voice is that? Danny says, the other guy's. So why do you want to protest? Dorothy asks. Danny says to help the homeless and to advocate for the people who have been devastated by the cult. Again, Danny's using some pretty impressive big words and very smoothly, might I add. Dorothy says, would you continue to do this if the RO is lifted? Do you have intentions, and if the RO is lifted, do you have intentions in any way to hurt Philip Campus? Danny says, I would intend to continue protests, and no, I have absolutely no intention of even really interacting with him. Dorothy says, do you wish he'd leave you alone? Danny says, yes. So now, Moxon with Danny on the stand. And Moxon's a little incredulous with the homeless thing. So Moxon says, do you know that Scientology donates millions to the homeless and as well as public health campaigns to aid them? Danny said, I didn't know that. Moxon says, oh, you didn't research it? Danny says, this is a great comeback of Danny. Danny says, well, I did. I also found information about all the child and elder abuse as well as labor law violations. Very good comeback. And Danny, again, just sarcastic, polite, cool as a cucumber. Moxon says, all ads on your video indicates that your videos are monetized. You also got donations. One of those, you also got donations. Is that true? He says, yes. Moxon then asks, one of those with you is Aja. Do you know her well? Danny says, no, I don't know her well. She is a protester. Moxon says, why didn't Aja testify on your behalf? And then Dorothy says, objection, this isn't relevant. And then they have to move on. The objection is granted, is sustained. Moxon says, you say you're engaging in free speech and protesting, but you yelled for someone to get off the sidewalk. When you were questioned, you said campus did not have backup. Danny said he did have backup. Moxon says, you watched the video? Danny said, several times. Video is brought up. Moxon says, you were walking down the sidewalk yelling, get out of the way. Danny says, yes, I did yell that. Moxon says, where did you want him to go? On the grass? And then the judge interrupts and says, counsel is not to argue with the witness. Let's move on. So the little admonishment from the judge. Moxon says, where was your foot? Where did he run you over? Where in your foot did he run it over? Did he roll over your feet first? And shows a photo. And Danny says, that's picture doesn't show that much. Moxon says, the photo is shown. Moxon says, do you remember dragging the scooter across your ankle? And when you dragged the scooter across your ankle, you were moving it hard? Danny said, I guess medium strength. Moxon said, you said you were pinned to the tree when you tried to drag the scooter across your ankle. Yeah. And Moxon says, so you got sequestered to the roots of the tree. I want to refer you to Exhibit 12. In this photo, you are pinned against the tree. And they show the photo, which I didn't see it, but apparently it obscures a lot. And Moxon says, do you expect campus to carry the scooter and get out of that tree jurisdiction? And Leah was in front. I thought you testified that Mr. Campos took his scooter and threw it at you. Danny said, I never said he threw it. I said he picked it up. Moxon said, so you said Campo was smirking as he went past you for the second incident. So was he smirking for a full 5 minutes? Danny says, no, when he was passing by. Moxon says, for your first arrest, you say charges were dropped. Danny says, yes, I went to court. The clerk told me it was dismissed. And then Moxon brings up the pepper spray, even though you're not supposed to bring up. They ruled that the pepper spray stuff could not be brought up, but Moxon brings it up yet again. And Moxon says, pepper spray, is that the activity you were arrested for? Danny says, no. And on May 9th, did you follow him? Moxon asks. Danny says, no, I didn't follow him. I did go over to him as he was heading inside, but I was a decent distance away. Moxon says, so Aja said at the time, you tried to run over Danny, right? And Moxon said, and so why isn't she testifying? Danny says, we just haven't asked her to testify. Moxon says, so why did you say... why would you say that? Why would you say though? Because we're talking about, it was the though thing that I brought up. And then Dorothy is quickly re-examining, and they replay the video, and they play a different part of the video, and that's pretty much all it is of where it's a different vantage point of Danny. Okay, so that is the crux. Now here are the long closing arguments, as best I could take them, which is kind of the most fun, because it really shows what they're trying to all throw together at the end. It's kind of the, you write an essay. It's the conclusion at the end. Moxon starts. It's unlawful violence what Danny did. He stormed up to the sidewalk to hurt a 72-year-old man. The video shows there was room to get past the sidewalk. So they got to Danny first, and Danny backs up, then yells, get out of the way, blocking the sidewalk. As Phil got to the center, there were women that were also in the area. Those women stood aside. Yet Danny grabs his scooter. There was no way the scooter actually went over Danny's foot. Danny said he grabbed it and yanked it over the roots of the tree. He knew what he was doing. He pulled this elderly man off the sidewalk. Then, 10 seconds later, Danny and Aja are following Phil. Aja screams, you tried to hurt Danny. Danny said he didn't touch me, though. Moxon brings up the though in though, the problem though in though. Then, in Phil's testimony about Phil's constant pain, he was feeling horrible about himself. He came all the way from Kentucky and he can't access his church. So Phil eventually tries to confront, to push back. An accomplice, Denver J, calls Phil psychotic. Phil felt this was a gang taking over the block. They feel their free speech rights. Danny feels his free speech rights, and Danny and the gang says, Danny and the gang feel their free speech rights trumps those of my clients. And about the chiropractor bill, Miss Gibbons-White says the bills have sales tax. Not true. Those bills says sales tax 0. No goods were bought. He paid for medical services. This whole situation is battery and elder abuse. That's a crime. We have an actual and a credible threat of violence. Multiple. When Denver J, or the other gentleman, says, don't come back again ever, Danny was laughing. Danny said, me telling Phil to get out of the way was an act of protest. No legitimate purpose other than to batter and frighten Mr. Campos. Any reasonable person would have substantial emotional duress as a result. It's hate speech. The hate speech that Danny used, it's a blight on society. We even offered to have Danny stay away from just Philip. That was it. He didn't take it. This doesn't infringe on Danny's rights to protest. He said he's traveling around the country to go to Church of Scientology buildings. Him holding a phone and standing there isn't protest. Anyone can protest, but you can't threaten or commit battery. We just want to allow Phil to go to church in peace. Think of the California Safeguard Act. That bill won't allow protesting within 300 feet of a religious service. The first part of the First Amendment is the right to worship, and that cannot be ignored. Now, this law, I don't know if any of you guys remember out of LA, and out of LA is very heroic and effective advocacy. Out of LA got a big group in addition to the Free Palestine protesters in Los Angeles City Hall because they were thinking about implementing that. They did not. They took it off, so there was not, they didn't even allow to be or a vote, and that's that. So it got defeated because of protest. That's the law he's talking about. So you can see how damaging it can be if it eventually gets passed, which I don't think it will because the council, Los Angeles City Council, saw how unpopular it is. So Dorothy has her closing steps. His closing, Mr. Moxon's closing misrepresents the law in testimony. That law is not into effect, the SAFE Act, and will likely be shot down by the state Supreme Court should it ever go into effect. We have a robust First Amendment. My client's protest activities are not against any religious beliefs. He's protesting the harm the Church of Scientology has caused to various people and the pain. Phil goes to church 5 to 7 days a week. Phil's girlfriend said that Phil, and sorry, she's saying Mr. Campus, but I wrote it down as Phil because it's easier, so I might say Phil, but she said Campus. Phil's girlfriend said that Phil has not been impeded from going to the church and practicing religion, yet my client is unable to take part in the protest. The law said harassment for restraining order is this: unlawful or a credible threat of violence. It must actually cause emotional duress. Speech. Sorry, guys. Horrible writing. Speech could even allow for somebody to have a little fear. Constitutionally protected activity is not included in the conduct. Protesting is annoying, yes, but that's the point. The First Amendment protects free speech. Burden is on the other to prove that the speech is not protected. Two types of speech are at issue here. One is to protest. In a 1999 ruling, it says, talking about specifically the Church of Scientology is a matter of public interest. Key differentiation, guys, which is really interesting. Just a little aside. There's a 99 ruling, and I'll look into this more, in Los Angeles where the court recognized that Scientology is a matter of public interest, meaning it is an entity that creates enough news where it's the separate category than the average religion. It's something that's controversial in the news, and therefore it's a little easy. It's the qualifications to go after them are more allowable than in a different religion. So that's being ruled as a matter of public interest. And also, everything, Dorothy continues, everything happened on the sidewalk. Mr. Campus says this was his block, his space, and yet Danny is called the gangster. The speech that occurred was protest. My client is there to protest the Church of Scientology's conduct and practices. On March 9th, Phil was using his scooter on a public sidewalk which violates code. This is not a medical scooter. Danny asked Mr. Campus to move out of the way. In all the commotion, the footage selected over my client showed a different story. But there was footage where Danny's right ankle was wedged to the tree. We don't even need compensation for Danny's jail time or unlawful arrest. All we are asking for is for him to continue his right to free speech and protest. All evidence court has seen, Campos has been all over the map in testimony. There is no clear and convincing evidence for a restraining order, but evidence to impede my client's right to protest. And that is all she wrote. See you tomorrow, guys. I appreciate all the support. And, yeah, I'm going to try to do a lunch thing and as well as an evening thing, but not guaranteed. You have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.